Chapter 13, Part 3 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3 by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In the meantime, everything was solid and safe beneath her feet. The tower stood strong, the pavement of the narrow platform which surrounded it was worn by time and weather, but perfectly secure. Here and there a breach in the balustrade showed like fantastic flamboyant work, but a regiment might have marched round it without disturbing a stone. Oona's excitement was extreme. Her heart beat in her ears like the roaring of a torrent. She went on, raised beyond herself, with a strange conviction that there was some object in her coming, and that this which seemed so accidental was no accident at all, but perhaps, how could she tell, an ordeal, the first step in that career which she had accepted. She put her hand upon the wall and guided herself by it, feeling a support in the rough and time-worn surface, the stones which had borne the assault of ages. Daylight was still bright around her, the last rays of the sun dazzling the loch below, which in its turn lent a glory of reflection to the sky above, and sent up a golden sheen through the air from the blaze upon the water. Round the corner of the tower the wind blew freshly in her face from the hills, reviving and encouraging her. Nature was on her side in all its frankness and reality, whatever mystery might be elsewhere. When she had turned the corner of the tower and saw beneath her the roofs of Auchnasheen visible among the trees, Oona suddenly stood still, her heart making, she thought, a pause as well as her feet, then with a bound beginning again in louder and louder pulsation. She had come to a doorway deep set in the wall, like the entrance of a cavern, with one broad, much-worn step, and a heavy old door bound and studded with iron. She stood for a moment uncertain, trembling, with a sense of the unforeseen and extraordinary which flew to her brain, a bewildering pang of sensation. For a moment she hesitated what to do, yet scarcely for a moment, since by this time she began to feel the force of an impulse which did not seem her own, and which she had no strength to resist. The door was slightly ajar, and pushing it open, Oona found herself, with another suffocating pause then bound of her heart, upon the threshold of a richly furnished room. She was aware of keeping her hold upon the door, with a terrifying anticipation of hearing it close upon her, but otherwise seemed to herself to have passed beyond her own control and consciousness, and to be aware only of the wonderful scene before her. The room was lighted from an opening in the roof, which showed in the upper part the rough stone of the walls in great blocks, rudely hewn, contrasting strangely with the heavy curtains with which they were hung round below. The curtains seemed of velvet, with panels of tapestry in dim designs here and there. The floor was covered with thick and soft carpets. A great telescope occupied a place in the center of the room, and various fine instruments, some looking like astronomical models, stood on tables about. The curtained walls were hung with portraits, one of which she recognized as that of the last Lord Erradeen. And in the center of all, supported on a table with a lamp burning in front of it, the light of which, she supposed, blown about by the sudden entrance of the air, so flickered upon the face that the features seemed to change and move, was the portrait of Walter. The cry which she would have uttered at this sight died in Oona's throat. She stood speechless, without power to think, gazing, conscious that this discovery was not for nothing, that here was something she must do, but unable to form a thought. The light fell upon the subdued colors of the hangings and furniture with a mystic paleness, without warmth, but the atmosphere was luxurious and soft, with a faint fragrance in it. Oona held open the door, which seemed in the movement of the air which she had admitted to struggle with her, but to which she held with a desperate grasp, and gazed spellbound. Was it the flickering of the lamp, or was it possible that the face of the portrait changed, that anguish came into the features, and that the eyes turned and looked at her appealing, full of misery, as Walter's eyes had looked? It seemed to Oona that her senses began to fail her. There was a movement in the tapestry, and from the other side of the room someone put it aside, and after looking at her for a moment, came slowly out. She had seen him only in the night and darkness, but there was not another such that she should mistake who it was. A thrill ran through her of terror, desperation, and daring. Whatever might now be done or said, Oona had come to the crisis of her fate. He came towards her with the air of courtesy and grace, which seemed his most characteristic aspect. "Come in," he said. "To reach this place requires a stout heart, but you are safe here." Oona made him no reply. She felt her voice and almost her breathing arrested in her throat, and felt capable of nothing but to hold fast to the heavy door, which seemed to struggle with her like a living thing. "You are afraid," he said, "but there is no reason to fear. Why should you think I would injure you? You might have fallen, like others, from the ruin, but you are safe here." He advanced another step and held out his hand. It seemed to Oona that the door crushed her as she stood against it, but she would not let go her hold, and with all her power she struggled to regain possession of her voice, but could not, paralyzed by some force which she did not understand. He smiled with a slight ridicule in his lofty politeness. "I tell you not to fear," he said. "Yours is not a spirit to fear, you who would have put yourself in his place and defied the demon. You find me no demon, and I offer no hostility, yet you are afraid." Oona was astonished by the sound of her own voice, which burst forth suddenly by no apparent will of her own, and which was strange to her, an unfamiliar tone. "I am not afraid. I am in the protection of God." He laughed softly. "You mean to exorcise me," he said, "but that is not so easily done, and I warn you that resistance is not the best way. You have trusted yourself to me." "No, no." "Yes, You fled from the danger to which another in your place succumbed, and you have taken refuge with me. To those who do so I am bound. Come in, there is no danger here." It seemed to Oona that there were two beings in her, one which ridiculed her distrust, which would have accepted the hand held out, another, not her, surely, not her frank and unsuspicious self, who held back and clung in terror to the door. She stammered, hearing even in her voice the same conflict, some tones that were her own, some shrill that were not hers. "I want no protection but God's." "Why, then," he said with a smile, "did you not remain among the ruins? What brought you here?" There was an answer, a good answer if she could have found it, but she could not find it, and made no reply. "You refuse my friendship, then," he said, "which is a pity, for it might have saved you much suffering. All the same, I congratulate you upon your prize." These last words stopped the current towards him of that natural sentiment of confidence and faith in her fellow creatures, which was Oona's very atmosphere. Her prize? What did he mean by her prize? "There could not be anything more satisfactory to your friends," he said, "a title, large estates, a position which leaves nothing to be desired. Your mother must be fully satisfied, and your brothers at the ends of the world will all feel the advantage. Other conquests might have been better for the Erradeens, but for you nothing could be more brilliant. It was a chance, too, unlikely, almost past hoping for, thus to catch a heart in the rebound." She stood aghast, gazing with eyes that were pained by the strain, but which would not detach themselves from his face. Brilliant? Advantages? Was she in a dream, or what was the meaning of the words? "It is against my own policy," he continued, "as perhaps you know. Still, I cannot help admiring your skill, unaided, against every drawback. You have a strong mind, young lady of the Isle, and the antecedents which would have daunted most women have been allies and auxiliaries to you." His laugh was quite soft and pleasant, sounding like gentle amusement, not ridicule. "I know your family," he continued, "of old. They were all men of strong stomachs, able to swallow much so long as their own interest was concerned. With Highland caterans that is comprehensible, but one so young as you, named like you, after—" he laughed again, that low, soft laugh of amusement, as if at something which tickled him in spite of himself. "The emblem of purity and innocence, heavenly Oona with her milk-white lamb." "You want," said Oona, whose voice sounded hoarse in her throat and sharp to her own ears, "to make me mad with your taunts, to make me give up." "Pardon me, I am only congratulating you," he said, and smiled, looking at her with a penetrating look of amusement and that veiled ridicule which does not infringe the outward forms of politeness. She gazed back at him with eyes wide open, with such a pang of wondering anguish and shame in her heart as left her speechless. For what he said was true. She had thought of her union with Walter in many ways before, but never in this. Now it all flashed upon her as by a sudden light. What he said was true. She who had never given a thought to worldly advantage had nevertheless secured it as much as if that had been her only thought. Her senses seemed to fail her in the whirl and heart-sickness of the revelation. It was true. She who had believed herself to be giving all, she was taking to herself rank, wealth, and honor in marrying Walter, and giving to him what? A woman's empty hand, no more. Oona was very proud, though she did not know it, and the blow fell upon her with crushing effect. Every word had truth in it. Her mother would be satisfied, the family would profit by it wherever they were scattered, and she would be the first to reap the advantage. Oona felt everything swim around her as in the whirl and giddiness of a great fall. Her fall was greater than that of Miss Milnathort, for it was the spirit, not the body, that was crushed and broken. She could not lift up her head. A horrible doubt even of herself came into her mind in her sudden and deep humiliation. Had this been in her thoughts, though she did not know it, no stroke could have been aimed at her so intolerable as this. He kept his eyes upon her, as if with a secret enjoyment of her overthrow. "You do not thank me for my congratulations," he cried. "Oh," she cried in the wondering self-abandonment of pain, "can you be a man, only a man, and strike so deep?" Then the very anguish of her soul gave her a sudden inspiration. She looked round her with eyes dilating. "When you can do this," she said, putting with unconscious eloquence her hand to her heart, "what do you want with things like those?" The sight of the lamp which burned before Walter's portrait had given her a painful sense of harm and danger when she saw it first. It filled her now with a keen disdain. To be able to pierce the very soul, and yet to use the aid of that. She did not know what its meaning was, yet suffering in every nerve, she scorned it, and turned to him with a questioning look which was full of indignation and contempt. And he who was so strong, so much above her in power and knowledge, shrank, almost imperceptibly, but yet he shrank, startled, from her look and question. "That," he said, "you who know so little of your own mind, how can you tell how human nature is affected? By what poor methods, as well as by great? You understand nothing, not yourself, far less the devices of the wise." "Oh, you are wise," cried Oona, "and cruel. You can make what is best look the worst. You can confuse our souls so that we cannot tell what is good in us and what evil. I know you are a great person, yet you hide and lurk in this place which no man knows, and work by spells and charms like what? A gleam of anger and shame, or of something that might have betrayed these sentiments on any other face, crossed his usually calm and lofty countenance. Oona, opposite to him, returned his look with a passionate face of indignation and disdain. She had forgotten herself altogether, and everything but the thrill and throbbing of the anguish which seemed to have taken the place of her heart in her. She feared nothing now. The blow which she had received had given her the nobleness of desperation. "Like a poor witch," she said, "like the wizard they call you, like one who plays upon the ignorant, not like the powerful spirit you are. You that can beat us down to the dust, both him and me, you that can turn sweet into bitter, and good into evil. Oh, how can you for shame take that way too, like a juggler," she cried in her passion, "like a sorcerer, like—" "You speak like a fool, though you are no fool," he said, "not knowing the stuff that we are made of." He made a step towards her as he spoke, and though his tone was rather sad than fierce, there came upon Oona in a moment such a convulsion of terror as proved what the weakness was of which he spoke. She clung with all her failing force to the door which seemed her only support, and broke out into a shrill cry, "Walter, Walter, save me!" Afraid of she knew not what, panic seizing her, and the light flickering in her fainting eyes. End of Chapter 13, Part 3, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 14 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. While Oona was standing on the verge of these mysteries, a trial of a very different kind had fallen to Walter. They had exchanged parts in this beginning of their union. It was his to lead the two elder ladies into those rooms, which were to him connected with the most painful moments of his life, but to them conveyed no idea beyond the matter of fact that they were more comfortably furnished and inhabitable than was to be expected in such a ruin. Even to Mrs. Methven, who was interrogating his looks all the time in an anxious endeavor to know what his feelings were, there seemed nothing extraordinary in the place save this. She seated herself calmly in the chair which he had seen occupied by so different a tenant, and looking smiling towards him, though always with a question in her eyes, began to express her wonder why, with Auchnasheen so near, it had been thought necessary to retain a dwelling-place among these ruins. But since Walter did from time to time inhabit them, his mother found it pleasant that they were so habitable, so almost comfortable, and answered old McAllister's apologies for the want of a fire or any preparations for their coming, with smiling assurances that all was very well, that she could not have hoped to find rooms in such careful repair. Mrs. Forrester was a great deal more effusive, and examined everything with a flow of cheerful remark, divided between Lord Erradeen and his old servant, with whom, as with everybody on the loch, she had the acquaintance of a lifetime. "I must see your wife, McAllister," she said, "and make her my compliment on the way she has kept everything. It is really just a triumph, and I would like to know how she has done it. To keep down the damp even in my little house, where there are always fires going and every room full, is a constant thought, and how she does it here, where it is so seldom occupied. The rooms are just wonderfully nice rooms, Lord Erradeen, but I would not say they were a cheerful dwelling. Above all, for a young man like you—" "No, they are not a very cheerful dwelling," said Walter with a smile, which to his mother, watching him so closely, told a tale of pain which she did not understand indeed, yet entered into with instinctive sympathy. The place began to breathe out suffering and mystery to her. She could not tell why. It was cold, both in reality and sentiment, the light coming into it from the cold northeast, from the mountains which stood up dark and chill above the low shining of the setting sun, and the cold affected her from his eyes and made her shiver. "I think," she said, "we must not stay too long. The sun is getting low, and the cold—" "But where is Oona?" said Mrs. Forrester. "I would not like to go away till she has had the pleasure too." "Oh, yes, it is a pleasure, Lord Erradeen, for you see we cannot look out at our own door without the sight of your old castle before our eyes, and it is a satisfaction to know what there is within. She must have stayed outside among the rains that she was always partial to. Perhaps McAllister will go and look for her, or, oh, Lord Erradeen, but I could not ask you to take that trouble." "My lord," said old McAllister aside, "if it had been any other young lady, I would have been after her before now. Miss Oona is just wonderful for sense and judgment, but when I think upon yon wall—" "I will go," said Walter. Amid all the associations of this place, the thought of Oona had threaded through every movement of his mind. He thought now that she had stayed behind out of sympathy, now that it was indifference, now he could not tell what to think. But no alarm for her safety had crossed his thoughts. He made a rapid step towards the door, then paused, with a bewildering sense that he was leaving two innocent women without protection in a place full of dangers which they knew nothing of. Was it possible that his enemy could assail him through these unsuspecting simple visitors? He turned back to them with a strange pang of pity and regret, which he himself did not understand. "Mother," he said, "you will forgive me. It is only for a moment." "Walter," she cried, full of surprise, then waved her hand to him with a smile, bidding him go, go, and bring Miss Forrester. Her attitude, her smile of perfect security and pleasure, went with him like a little picture as he went down the spiral stairs. Mrs. Forrester was in the scene too, in all her pretty faded color and animation, begging him, dear me, not to take the trouble, for no doubt Oona was just at the door, or among the ruins, or saying a word to Hamish about the boat. A peaceful little picture, no shadow upon it, the light a little cold, but the atmosphere so serene and still. Strange contrast to all that he had seen there, the conflict, the anguish, which seemed to have left their traces upon the very walls. He hurried downstairs with this in his mind, and a lingering of all his thoughts upon the wistful smiling of his mother's face, though why at this moment he should dwell upon that was a wonder to himself. Oona was not on the grassy slope before the door, nor talking to Hamish at the landing-place, as her mother suggested, there was no trace of her among the ruins, then, but not till then, Walter began to feel a tremor of alarm. There came suddenly into his mind the recollection of that catastrophe of which he had been told in Edinburgh by its victim. It sent a shiver through him, but even yet he did not seriously fear, for Oona was no stranger to lose herself upon the dangerous places of the ruin. He went hurriedly up the steps to the battlements, where he himself had passed through so many internal struggles, thinking nothing less than to find her in one of the embrasures, where he had sat and looked out upon the loch. He had been startled as he came out of the shadow of the house by a faint cry, which seemed to issue from the distance, from the other extremity of the water, and which was indeed the cry for help to which Oona had given utterance when she felt the wall crumbling under her feet, which the wind had carried far down the loch, and which came back in a distant echo. Walter began to remember this cry as he searched in vain for any trace of her. And when he reached the spot where the danger began, and saw the traces that some other steps had been there before him, and that a shower of crumbling mortar and fragments of stone had fallen, his heart leaped to his throat with sudden horror. This was calmed by the instant reassurance that had she fallen, he must at once have discovered the catastrophe. He looked round him bewildered, unable to conceive what had become of her. Where had she gone? The boat lay at the landing-place, with Hamish in waiting, the whole scene full of rest and calm, and everything silent about and around. "Oona," he cried, but the wind caught his voice too, and carried it away to the village on the other bank, to her own isle away upon the glistening water, where Oona was not. Where was she? His throat began to grow parched, his breath to labor with the hurry of his heart. He stood on the verge of the precipice of broken masonry, straining his eyes over the stony pinnacles above and the sharp irregularities of the ruin. There he saw something suddenly which made his heart stand still. Her glove lying where she had dropped it in her hurried progress along the ledge. He did not pause to think how she got there, which would have seemed at another moment impossible, but with a desperate spring and a sensation as of death in his heart, followed where she had passed, wherever that might be. Walter neither knew where he was going, nor how he made his way along those jagged heights. He did not go cautiously as Oona had done, but flew on, taking no notice of the dangers of the way. The sound of voices, and of his own name, and Oona's cry for help, reached his ear as with a leap he gained the stone balcony of the tower. His feet scarcely touched the stones as he flew to her who called him, nor did he think where he was, or feel any wonder at the call, or at the voices on such a height, or at anything that was happening. His mind had no room for any observation or thought, save that Oona called him. He flung himself into the dark doorway as if it had been a place he had known all his life, and caught her as her strength failed her. She who had thought she could put herself in his place, and who had been ready to brave everything for him, turned round with her eyes glazing and her limbs giving way, with strength enough only to throw herself upon his breast. Thus Walter found himself once more face to face with his enemy. The last time they had met, Lord Erradeen had been goaded almost to madness. He stood now, supporting Oona on his arm, stern, threatening in his turn. "If you have killed her," he cried, "if you have hurt her as you did before, if you have made her your victim as you did before," there was no shrinking in his look now. He spoke out loudly with his head high, his eyes blazing upon the enemy who was no longer his, but hers, which had a very different meaning. And though he stood against the door where he had found Oona, holding it wide open, this was done unconsciously, with no idea of precaution. The time for that was over now, and with the sensation of his support, the throb of his heart so near hers, Oona came back to herself. She turned slowly round towards the inhabitant of the tower. "Walter, tell him that though he can make us miserable, he cannot make us consent. Tell him that now we are two, not one, and that our life is ours, not his." "Oh," she cried, lifting her eyes, addressing herself directly to him, "listen to me. Over me you have no power, and Walter is mine, and I am his. Go, leave us in peace." She says true, leave us in peace. In all my life now I shall do no act that is not half hers, and over her you have no power. "You expect me then," he said, "to give way to this bargain of self-interest, a partnership of protection to you and gain to her, and you think that before this I am to give way." "It is not so," cried Walter, "not so. Oona, answer him. I turned to her for help because I loved her, and she to me for, I know not why, because she loved me. Answer him, Oona, if it should be at this moment for death, not for life." She turned to him with a look and a smile, and put her arm through his, clasping his hand, then turned again to the other, who stood looking on. "If it should be for death," she said. There was a moment of intense stillness. He before whom these two stood knew human nature well. He knew every way in which to work upon a solitary being, a soul alone, in his power, but he knew that before two, awake, alive, on the watch one for the other, these methods were without power, and though his experiences were so great, the situation was new. They were in the first absolute devotion of their union, invulnerable, no germ of distrust, no crevice of possible separation. He might kill, but he could not move them. This mysterious agent was not above the artifices of defeat. To separate them was the only device that remained to him. "You are aware," he said, "that here, if nowhere else, you are absolutely in my power. You have come to me, I have not gone to you. If you wish to sacrifice her life, you can do so, but what right have you to do it? How dare you take her from those who love her, and make her your victim? She will be your victim, not mine. There is time yet for her to escape. It is for her to go. Die? Why should she die? Are you worth such a sacrifice? Let her go." Hold me fast, do not loose me, Walter," cried Oona wildly in his ear. And here his last temptation took him in the guise of love, and rent him in two. To let her perish, was that possible? Could he hold her, though she was his life, and sacrifice hers? Walter could not pause to think. He tore his hand out of hers, which would not be loosed, and thrust her from him. "Oona," he cried, his voice sinking to a whisper, "go, Oona, go, not to sacrifice you. No, no, I will not. Anything but that. While there is time, go." She stood for a moment between the two, deserted, cast off by him who loved her. It was the supreme crisis of all this story of her heart. For a moment she said nothing, but looked at them, meeting the keen gaze of the tempter, whose eyes seemed to burn her, gazing at Walter, who had half closed his, not to see her go. Then, with the sudden, swift, passionate action, unpremeditated and impulsive, which is natural to women, she flung herself before him, and seized with her hands the table upon which the light was burning. "You said," she cried, breathless, "that you used small methods as well as great, and this is one, whatever it is." She thrust it from her violently as she spoke. The lamp fell with a great crash and broke, and the liquid which had supplied it burst out and ran blazing in great globules of flames over the floor. The crash, the blaze, the sudden uproar was like a wall between the antagonists. The curtains swaying with the wind, the old dry tapestries, caught in the fire like tinder. Oona, as wild with fear as she had been with daring, caught at Walter's hand with the strength of despair, and fled, dragging him after her. The door clanged behind them as he let it go, then burst open again with the force of the breeze, and let out a great blaze, the red mad gleam of fire in the sunshine and daylight, unnatural, devouring. With a sense that death was in their way, before and behind, they went forth clinging to each other, half stupefied, half desperate. Then sense and hearing and consciousness itself were lost in a roar as of all the elements let loose, a great dizzy upheaving as of an earthquake. The whole world darkened round them. There was a sudden rush of air and a whirl of giddy sensation, and nothing more. The two mothers, meanwhile, talked calmly in the room below, where McAllister had lighted the fire, and where, in the cheerful blaze and glow, everything became more easy and tranquil and calm. Perhaps even the absence of the young pair, whose high strain of existence at the moment could not but disturb the elder souls with sympathy, made the quiet waiting, the pleasant talk, more natural. Mrs. Methven had been deeply touched by her son's all unneeded apology for leaving her. She could have laughed over it and cried, it was so kind, so tender of Walter, yet unlike him, the late awakening of thought and tenderness to which she had never been accustomed, which penetrated her with a sweet and delightful amusement as well as happiness. She had no reason to apprehend any evil, Neither was Mrs. Forrester afraid for Oona. Oh, no, she is well used to going about by herself. There is nobody near but knows my Oona. Her family and all her belongings have been on the loch, I might say, since ever it was a loch, and if any stranger took it upon him to say an uncivil word, there is neither man nor woman for 10 miles round but would stand up for her, if such a thing could be, Mrs. Forrester added with dignity, which is just impossible and not to be thought of. And as for ruins, she knows them well. But I would like her to see the books, and what a nice room Lord Erradeen has here, for often we have been sorry for him, and wondered what kind of accommodation there was, and what good it could do to drag the poor young man out of his comfortable house, if it was only once in the year. And why should he come here once in the year? Mrs. Methven asked with a smile. That is just the strange story, but I could not take it upon myself to say, for I know nothing except the common talk, which is nonsense, no doubt. You will never have been in the north before, said Mrs. Forrester, thinking it judicious to change the subject. Never before, Mrs. Methven replied, perceiving equally on her side that the secrets of the family were not to be gleaned from a stranger, and she added, my son himself has not yet seen his other houses, though this is the 2nd time he has come here. It is to be hoped, said the other, that now he will think less of that weary London, which I hear is just an endless traffic of parties and pleasure, and settle down to be a Scots lord. We must make excuses for a young man that naturally likes to be among his own kind, and finds more pleasure in an endless ongoing than ladies always understand, though I will not say but I like society very well myself, and would be proud to see my friends about me, if it were not for the quiet way that Oona and I are living upon a little bit isle, which makes it always needful to consider the weather, and if there is a moon, and all that, and besides that I have no gentleman in the house. I never had a daughter, said Mrs. Methven. There can be no companion so sweet. You mean Oona? Her and me, said Mrs. Forrester, with Scotch grammar and a smile. We are but one, and you do not expect me to praise myself. When I say we have no gentleman in the house, it is because we cannot be of the use we would wish to our friends. To offer a cup of tea is just all I have in my power, and that is nothing to ask a gentleman to. But for all that, it is wonderful how constantly we are seeing our neighbors, especially in the summer time, when the days are long. But bless me, what is that? Mrs. Forrester cried. The end of her words was lost in a tumult and horror of sound, such as Loch Houran had never heard before. End of chapter 14. Read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 15 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The explosion startled the whole country for miles around. The old castle was at all times the center of the landscape, standing somber in its ruin amid all the smiling existence of today. It flashed in a moment into an importance more wonderful, blazing up to the sky in fire and flame and clouds of smoke like a great battle. The whole neighborhood, as far as sight could carry, saw this new wonder, and sprang into sudden excitement, alarm, and terror. Every soul rushed out of the village on the bank. Servants appeared half frantic in front of Auchnasheen, pushing out in skiffs and fishing cobbles upon the water, which seemed to share the sudden passion of alarm, and became but one great reflection, red and terrible, of the flames which seemed to burst in a moment from every point. Some yachtsmen, whose little vessel had been lying at anchor, and who had been watching with great curiosity the moving figures on the height of the gallery round the tower, with much laughing discussion among themselves as to the possibility of having seen the ghost, were suddenly brought to seriousness in a moment, as the yacht bounded under their feet with the concussion of the air, and the idle sail flapping from the mast grew blood-red in the sudden glare. It was the work of another moment to leap into their boat and speed as fast as the oars could plough through the water to the rescue, if rescue were needed. Who could be there? They asked each other. Only old McAllister with his wife, who, safe in the lower story, would have full time to escape. But then, what were those figures on the tower? The young men almost laughed again as they said to each other, "The Warlock Lord. Let's hope he's blown himself up and made an end of all that nonsense," said the skeptic of the party. But just then the stalwart boatload came across a wild skiff dashing through the water, old Symington like a ghost in the stern, and red-haired Duncan, with bare arms and throat, rowing as for life and death. "My lord is there," cried the old man with quivering lips. "The ladies are there." "And Hamish and Miss Oona," fell stammering from Duncan, half dumb with horror. The young yachtsmen never said a word, but looked at each other and flew along over the blood-red water. Oona, it was natural they should think of her first in her sweetness and youth. The two mothers, in their tranquil talk, sat still for a moment and looked at each other with pale awe on their faces, when that wild tumult enveloped them, paralyzing every other sense. They thought they were lost, and instinctively put out their hands to each other. They were alone, even the old servant had left them, and there they sat breathless, expecting death. For a moment the floor and walls so quivered about them that this alone seemed possible, but nothing followed, and their faculties returned. They rose with one impulse and made their way together to the door. Then, the awe of death passing, life rising in them, flew down the staircase with the lightness of youth, and out to the air, which already was full of the red flashes of the rising flames. But once there, a worse thing befell these two poor women. They had been still in the face of death, but now, with life saved, came a sense of something more terrible than death. They cried out in one voice the names of their children. "My boy! Oona! Old McAllister, speechless, dragging his old wife after him, came out and joined them, the two old people looking like owls suddenly scared by the outburst of lurid light. "Oh, what will be happening?" said the old woman, her dazed astonishment contrasting strangely with the excitement and terror of the others. Mrs. Forrester answered her with wild and feverish volubility. "Nothing will have happened," she said. "Oona, my darling, what would happen? She knows her way. She would not go a step too far. Oh, Oona, where are you? Why will you not answer me? They will just be bewildered like ourselves, and she will be in a sore fright, but that will be for me. Oona, Oona, she will be frightened, but only for me. Oona, oh, Hamish, man, can ye not find your young lady? The fire, I am not afraid of the fire. She will just be wild with terror for me. Oona, Oona, Oona," cried the poor lady, her voice ending in a shriek. Mrs. Methven stood by her side, but did not speak. Her pale face was raised to the flaming tower, which threw an illumination of red light over everything. She did not know that it was supposed to be inaccessible. For anything she knew, her boy might be there perishing within her sight, and she could do nothing. The anguish of the helpless and hopeless gave her a sort of terrible calm. She looked at the flames as she might have looked at executioners who were putting her son to death. She had no hope. Into the midst of this distracted group came a sudden rush of men from the boats, which were arriving every minute, the young yachtsmen at their head. Mrs. Forrester flung herself upon these young men, catching hold of them as they came up. "My Oona's among the ruins," she said breathlessly. "Oh, no fear but you'll find her. Oh, find her, for I'm going out of my senses, I think. I know that she's safe, oh, quite safe, but I'm silly, and my nerves are all wrong. Oh, Harry, for the love of God, and Patrick, my fine lad, and not a brother to look after my bairn." "We are all her brothers," cried the youths, struggling past the poor lady, who clung to them and hindered their progress, her voice coming shrill through the roar of the flames and the bustle and commotion below. Amid this tumult, her piercing "Oona, Oona," came in from time to time, sharp with the derision of tragedy for anything so ineffectual and vain. Before many minutes had passed, the open space in front of the house, which stood intact and as yet unthreatened, was crowded with men, none of them, however, knowing what to do, nor, indeed, what had happened. The information that Lord Erradeen and Oona were missing was handed about among them, repeated with shakings of the head to every newcomer. Mrs. Methven, standing in the midst, whom nobody knew, received all the comments like so many stabs into her heart. Was it them that were seen on the walls just before? Then nothing could have saved them. The walls all breached to the lock. No cannon could have done it cleaner. It's there you'll find them. Find them? Oh, Hun, the bodies of them. Let's hope their souls are in a better place. The unfortunate mother heard what everybody said. She stood among strangers, with nobody who had any compassion upon her, receiving over and over again the assurance of his fate. The first difficulty here, as in every other case of the kind, was that no one knew what to do. There were hurried consultations, advices called out on every hand, suggestions, many of them impossible, but no authoritative guide to say what was to be done. Mrs. Methven, turning her miserable looks from one to another, saw standing by her side a man of commanding appearance, who seemed to take no share in either advice or action, but stood calmly looking on. He was so different from the rest that she appealed to him instinctively. "Oh, sir," she cried, "you must know what is best to be done. Tell them." He started a little when she spoke. His face, when he turned it towards her, was full of strange expression. There was sadness in it, and mortification, and wounded pride. She said after that he was like a man disappointed, defeated, full of dejection and indignation. He gave her a look of keen wonder, and then said with a sort of smile, "Ah, that is true." Then in a moment his voice was heard over the crowd. "The thing to be done," he said, in a voice which was not loud, but which immediately silenced all the discussions and agitations round, "is to clear away the ruins. The fire will not burn downward. It has no food that way. It will exhaust itself. The young lady fell with the wall. If she is to be found, she will be found there." The men all crowded about the spot from which the voice came. "What's that that's speaking? I see nobody. What were you saying, sir?" "Whoever it is the right thing," cried young Patrick from the yacht. "Harry, keep you the hose going on the house. I'll take the other work, and thank you for the advice, whoever you are." Mrs. Forrester, too, had heard this voice, and the command and calm in it gave to her troubled soul a new hope. She pushed her way through the crowd to the spot from whence it came. "Oh," she cried, "did you see my Oona fall? Did you see my Oona? No, no, it would not be her that fell. You are just deceived. Where is my Oona? Oh, sir, tell them where she is, that they may find her, and we'll pray for you on our bended knees, night and morning, every day." She threw herself on her knees as she spoke, on the grass, putting up her quivering, feverish hands. The other mother, with a horror which she felt even in the midst of her misery, saw the man to whom this heart-rending prayer was addressed, without casting even a glance at the suppliant at his feet, or with any appearance of interest in the proceedings he had advised, turn quietly on his heel and walk away. He walked slowly across the open space and disappeared upon the edge of the water, with one glance upward to the blazing tower, taking no more notice of the anxious crowd collected there than if they had not existed. Nor did anyone notice the strange spectator going away at the height of the catastrophe, when everybody far and near was roused to help. The men running hurriedly to work did not seem to observe him. The two old servants of the house, Symington and McAllister, stood crowding together out of the reach of the stream of water which was being directed upon the house. But Mrs. Methven took no note of them, only it gave her a strange surprise in the midst of her anguish to see that while her Walter's fate still hung in the balance, there was no one who could calmly go away. By this time the sun had set. The evening, so strangely different from any other that ever had fallen on the loch, was beginning to darken on the hills, bringing out with wilder brilliancy the flaming of the great fire which turned the tower of Loch Houran into a lantern, and blazed upwards in a great pennon of crimson and orange against the blue of the skies. For miles down the loch the whole population was out upon the roads gazing at this wonderful sight. The hillsides were crimsoned by the reflection, as if the heather had bloomed again. The water glowed red under the cool calm of the evening sky. Round about Birkenbraes was a little crowd, the visitors and servants occupying every spot from which this wonder could be seen, and Mr. Williamson himself, with his daughter, standing at the gate to glean what information might be attainable from the passers-by. Katy, full of agitation, unable to bear the common babble inside, had walked on, scarcely knowing what she did, in her indoor dress, shivering with cold and excitement. They had all said to each other that there could be no danger to life in that uninhabited place. "Toots, no danger at all," Mr. Williamson had said, with great satisfaction in the spectacle. "Old McAllister and his wife are just like rats in their hole. The fire will never come near them, and the ruin will be none the worse. It will just be more a ruin than ever." There was something in Katy's mind which revolted against this easy treatment of so extraordinary a catastrophe. It seemed to her connected, she could not tell how, with the scene which had passed in her own room so short a time before. But for shame she would have walked on to Auchnasheen to make sure that Walter was in no danger. But what would he think of her? What would everybody think? Katy went on, however, abstracted from herself, her eyes upon the blaze in the distance, her heart full of disturbed thoughts. All at once she heard the firm, quick step of someone advancing to meet her. She looked up eagerly. It might be Walter himself. It might be. When she saw who it was, she came to a sudden pause. Her limbs refused to carry her. Her very breath seemed to stop. She looked up at him and trembled. The question that formed on her lips could not get utterance. He was perfectly calm and courteous, with a smile that bewildered her and filled her with terror. "Is there anyone in danger?" he said, answering as if she had spoken. "I think not. There is no one in danger now. It is a fine spectacle. We are at liberty to enjoy it without any drawback, now." "Oh, sir," said Katy, her very lips quivering, "you speak strangely. Are you sure that there was no one there?" "I am sure of nothing," he said, with a strange smile. And then Mr. Williamson, delighted to see a stranger, drew near. "You need not be so keen with your explanations, Katie. Of course it is the gentleman we met at Loch Houran. Alas, poor Loch Houran, we will never meet there again. You will just stay to dinner now that we have got you. Come, Katie, where are your manners? You say nothing. Indeed, we will consider it a great honor, just ourselves and a few people that are staying in the house, and as for dress, what does that matter? It is a thing that happens every day. Neighbors in the country will look in without preparation, and for my part, I say always, the more the merrier," said the open-hearted millionaire. The stranger's face lighted up with a gleam of scornful amusement. "The kindness is great," he said, "but I am on my way to the other end of the loch." "You are never walking?" cried Mr. Williamson. "Lord bless us! That was a thing that used to be done in my young days, but nobody thinks of now. Your servant will have gone with your baggage, and you would have a delicacy, I can easily understand, in asking for a carriage in the excitement of the moment. But ye shall not walk past my house, where there are conveyances of all kind that it is just a charity to use. Now, I'll take no denial. There's the boat. In 10 minutes they'll get up steam. I had ordered it, ready to send up to Auchnasheen for news, but as a friend would never be leaving if the family was in trouble, it is little use to do that now. I will just make a sign to the boat, and they'll have ye down in no time. It will be the greatest pleasure, if you are sure you will not stay to your dinner in the meantime, which is what I would like best." He stood looking down upon them both from his great height. His look had been sad and grave when he had met Katie, a look full of expression which she could not fathom. There came now a gleam of amusement over his countenance. He laughed out. "That would be admirable," he said, offering no thanks. "I will take your boat, like a prince according, rather than receiving, a favor." Mr. Williamson looked at his daughter with a confused air of astonishment and perplexity, but he sent a messenger off in a boat to warn the steamer, which lay with its lights glimmering white in the midst of the red reflections on the loch. The father and daughter stood there silenced, and with a strange sensation of alarm, beside this stranger. They exchanged another frightened look. "You'll be going a long journey," Mr. Williamson said, faltering, scarcely knowing what he said. "I am going for a long time, at least," the stranger said. He seemed to put aside their curiosity as something trifling, unworthy to be answered, and with a wave of his hand to them, took the path towards the beach. They turned and looked after him, drawing close to each other for mutual comfort. It was twilight, when everything is confusing and uncertain. They lost sight of him, then saw him again, like a tall pillar on the edge of the water. There was a confusion of boats coming and going, in which they could not trace whither he went or how. Katie and her father stood watching, taking no account of the progress of time, or of the cold wind of the night which came in gusts from the hills. They both drew a long sigh of relief when the steamer was put in motion and went off down the loch with its lights like glowworms on the yards and the masts. Nor did they say a word to each other as they turned and went home. When inquiries were made afterwards, nothing but the most confused account could be had of the embarkation. The boatman had seen the stranger, but none among them would say that he had conveyed him to the steamer, and on the steamer the men were equally confused, answering at random with strange glances at each other. Had they carried that passenger down to the foot of the loch, not even Katie's keen questioning could elicit a clear reply. But when the boat had steamed away, carrying into the silence the rustle of its machinery and the twinkling of its lights, there was another great explosion from the tower of Loch Houran, a loud report which seemed to roar away into the hollow of the mountains, and came back in 1,000 rolling echoes. A great column of flame shot up into the sky, the stones fell like a cannonade, and then all was darkness and silence. The loch fell into sudden gloom. The men who were laboring at the ruins stopped short and groped about to find each other through the dust and smoke which hung over them like a cloud. The bravest stood still, as if paralyzed, and for a moment, through all this strange scene of desolation and terror, there was but one sound audible, the sound of a voice which cried, "Oona! Oona!" now shrill, now hoarse with exhaustion and misery. "Oona! Oona!" to earth and heaven. End of chapter 15, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 16 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. When the curious and the inefficient dropped away, as they did by degrees as night fell, there were left the 3 youths from the yacht, Hamish, Duncan, and 2 or 3 men from the village, enough to do a greater work than that which lay before them, but the darkness and the consternation, and even their very eagerness and anxiety, confused their proceedings. Such lamps as they could get from McAllister were fastened up among the heaps of ruin, and made a series of wild Rembrandt-like pictures in the gloom, but afforded little guidance to their work. The masses of masonry which they labored to clear away seemed to increase rather than diminish under their picks and spades, new angles of the wall giving way when they seemed to have come nearly to the foundation. And now and then from above a mass of stones penetrated through and through by the fire, and kept in their place only by mere balance, would topple down without warning, dangerously near their heads, risking the very lives of the workers, upon whom discouragement gained as the night wore on, and no result was obtained. After a while, with a mournful unanimity, they stopped work and consulted in whispers what was to be done. Not a sound had replied to their cries. They had stopped 100 times to listen, one more imaginative than the rest, thinking he heard an answering cry, but no such response had ever come. How was it possible, from under the choking, suffocating mass, which rolled down upon them as they worked, almost stopping their breath? They gave up altogether in the middle of the night in dejection and hopelessness. The moon had risen and shone all round them, appearing through the great chasms in the wall, making a glory upon the loch, but lending no help here, the shadow of the lower part of the house lying black over the new-made ruin. What was the use? They stood disconsolately consulting over the possibilities. If Walter and Oona were under those heaps of ruin, it was impossible that they could be alive, and the men asked each other, shaking their heads, what chance there was of any of those fortunate accidents which sometimes save the victims of such a calamity. The wall had been already worn by time. There were no beams, no archways which could have sheltered them. Everything had come down in one mass of ruin. After many and troubled discussions, they prepared reluctantly to abandon the hopeless work. Perhaps, in the morning, it was all that anyone could say. The young yachtsman made a last effort, calling out Walter's name. "If you can speak, for God's sake, speak. Any sign and we'll have you out. Erradeen, Erradeen," they cried. But the silence was as that of a grave. A fall of powdery fragments now and then from the heap, sometimes a great stone solemnly bounding downwards from point to point, the light blown about by the night air lighting upon the dark group, and the solitary figure of Hamish apart from them, who was working with a sort of rage, never pausing, pulling away stones with his hands. This was all. Not a moan, not a cry, not a sound of existence under those shapeless piles of ruin. The only thing that broke the silence, and which came now with a heart-rending monotony, almost mechanical, was the cry of "Oona! Oona!" which Oona's mother, scarcely conscious, sent out into the night. The men stole softly round the corner of the house, which remained untouched, to get to their boats, stealing away like culprits, though there was no want of goodwill in them. But they were not prepared for the scene that met them there. The little platform before the door and the landing-place were bright almost as day with the shining of the moon, the water one sheet of silver, upon which the boats lay black, the grassy space below all white and clear. In the midst of this space, seated on a stone, was Mrs. Methven. She had scarcely stirred all night. Her companion in sorrow had been taken into the shelter of the house, but she, unknown and half forgotten, and strong with all the vigor of misery, had remained there, avoiding speech of anyone. With all her senses absorbed in listening, not a stroke had escaped her, scarcely a word. For a long time she had stood and walked about, not asking a question, observing, seeing, hearing all that was done. But as the awful hours went on, she had dropped down upon this rough seat, little elevated above the ground, where her figure now struck the troubled gaze of the young men as if it had been that of a sentinel, watching to see that they did not abandon their work. No such thought was in her mind. She was conscious of every movement they had made. For a moment she had thought that their call upon her son meant that they had found some trace of him, but that was a mere instantaneous thrill which her understanding was too clear to continue to entertain. She had said to herself from the beginning that there was no hope. She had said from the first what the men had said to each other reluctantly after hours of exertion. What was the good, since nothing could be done? Yet all the while, as she said this, she was nursing within her bosom, concealing it even from her own consciousness, covering up the smoldering, dying fire in her heart, a hope that would not altogether die. She would not even go towards the workers when they called out her son's name to know what it was, but only waited with a desperate, secret, half-heathen thought that perhaps if she did not cry and importune, but was silent, letting God do what he would, he might yet relent and bring her back her boy. Oh, be patient, put on at least the guise of patience, and perhaps he would be touched by the silence of her misery, he who had not heard her prayers. She sat going over 100 things in her heart. That Walter should have come back to her, called her to him, opened his heart to her, as a preparation for being thus snatched from her forever. She said to herself that by and by she would thank God for this great mercy, and that she had thus found her son again, if only for 2 days, but in the meantime her heart bled all the more for the thought, and bereavement became more impossible, more intolerable, even from that, which afterwards would make it almost sweet. As she kept that terrible vigil, and heard the sound of the implements with which, oh, what was it? Not him, his body, the mangled remains of him, were being sought, she seemed to see him, standing before her, leaning upon her, the strong on the weak, pouring his troubles into her bosom, as he had not done since he was a child. And now he was lying crushed beneath those stones. Oh, no, no! Oh, no, no! It was not possible. God was not like that, holding the cup of blessing to a woman's lips and then snatching it away. And then, with an effort, she would say to herself what she had said from the first, what she had never wavered in saying, that there was no hope. How could there be any hope? Crushed beneath tons of falling stones, oh, crushed out of recognition, out of humanity. Her imagination spared her nothing. When they found him, they would tell her it was better, she the mother that bore him, that she should not see him again. And all the while the moon shining and God looking on. She was callous to the cry that came continually, mechanically, now stronger, now fainter, from the rooms above. Oona! Oona! Sometimes it made her impatient. Why should the woman cry, as if her voice could reach her child under those masses of ruin? And she could not cry, who had lost her all, her only one. Why should the other have that relief, and she none, nor any hope? But all the sounds about her caught her ear with a feverish distinctness. When she heard the steps approaching, after the pause of which she had divined the meaning, they seemed to go over her heart, treading it down into the dust. She raised her head and looked at them as they came up, most of the band stealing behind to escape her eye. "I heard you," she said, "call, my son. It was only to try. It was to make an effort. It was a last chance. A last," though she was so composed there was a catch in her breath as she repeated this word, but she added, with the quiet of despair, "You are going away?" The young man who was the spokesman stood before her like a culprit with his cap in his hand. "My brothers and I," he said, "would gladly stay if it was any use, but there is no light to work by, and I fear that by this time—" "There is no more hope," she said. "I have no hope. I never had any hope." The young man turned away with a despairing gesture, and then returned to her humbly, as if she had been a queen. "We are all grieved, more grieved than words can say, and gladly would we stay if we could be of any use. But what can we do? For we are all convinced—" "Know me!" cried Hamish, coming forward in the moonlight. "Know me!" His bleeding hands left marks on his forehead as he wiped the heavy moisture from it. His eyes shone wildly beneath his shaggy brows. "I was against it," he cried, "from the first. I said, what would they be doing here? But convinced that I will never be. No, till I find— Mem, if ye tell them, they'll bide. Tell them to bide, as sure as God is in heaven." That was all her thought. "We will find her yet." The other men had slunk away, and were softly getting into their boats. The 3 young yachtsmen alone waited, a group of dark figures about her. She looked up at them standing together in the moonlight, her face hollowed out as if by the work of years. "He is my only one," she said, "my only one, and you are all the sons of one mother." Her voice had a shrill anguish in it, insupportable to hear, and when she paused, there came still more shrilly into the air, with a renewed passion, "Oona! Oona!" the cry that had not ceased for hours. The young man who was called Patrick flung his clenched hand into the air. He gave a cry of pity and pain unendurable. "Go and lie down for an hour or 2, he said to the others, "and come back with the dawn. Don't say a word. I'll stay. It's more than a man can bear." When the others were gone, this young fellow implored the poor lady to go in, to lie down a little, to try and take some rest. What good could she do? He faltered, and she might want all her strength for tomorrow, using all those familiar pleas with which the miserable are mocked. Something like a smile came over her wan face. "You are very kind," she said. "Oh, very kind, but no more." When he returned and pressed the same arguments upon her, she turned away almost with impatience. "I will watch with my son tonight," she said, putting him away with her hand. And thus the night passed. Mrs. Forrester had been taken only half conscious into Walter's room early in the evening. Her cry had become almost mechanical, not to be stopped, but she, it was hoped, was but half aware of what was passing. The unwonted and incredible anguish having exhausted her simple being, unfamiliar with suffering, Mr. Cameron, the minister from the village, had come over on the first news, and Mysie from the isle to take care of her mistress. Together they kept watch over the poor mother, who lay sometimes with her eyes half closed in a sort of stupor, sometimes springing up wildly to go to Oona, who was ill, and wanting her, she cried, distraught. "Oona, Oona," she continued to cry through all. Mysie had removed her bonnet, and her light faded hair was all dishevelled, without the decent covering of the habitual cap, her pretty colour gone. Sorrow seems to lie harder on such a gentle soul. It is cruel. There is nothing in it that is akin to the mild level of a being so easy and common. It was torture that prostrated the soul, not the passion of love and anguish which gave to the other mother the power of absolute self-control and strength which could endure all things. Mr. Cameron himself, struck to the heart, for Oona was as dear to him as a child of his own, restrained his longing to be out among the workers in order to soothe and subdue her, and though she scarcely understood what he was saying, his presence did soothe her. It was natural that the minister should be there, holding her up in this fiery passage, though she could not tell why. And thus the night went on. The moonlight faded outside, the candles paled and took a sickly hue within as the blue dawn came stealing over the world. At that chilliest, most awful moment of all the circle of time, Mrs. Forrester had sunk into half unconsciousness. She was not asleep, but exhaustion had almost done the part of sleep, and she lay on the sofa in a stupor, not moving, and for the first time intermitting her terrible cry. The minister stole downstairs in that moment of repose. He was himself an old man, and shaken beyond measure by the incidents of the night. His heart was bleeding for the child of his spirit, the young creature to whom he had been tutor, counselor, almost father from her childhood. He went out with his heart full, feeling the vigil insupportable in the miserable room above, yet almost less supportable when he came out to the company of the grey hills growing visible, a stern circle of spectators round about, and realized with a still deeper pang the terrible unmitigated fact of the catastrophe. It was with horror that he saw the other mother sitting patient upon the stone outside. He did not know her, and had forgotten that such a person existed as Lord Erradeen's mother. Had she been there all night? God help us, he said to himself. How selfish we are, even to the sharers of our calamity. She looked up at him as he passed, but said nothing. And what could he say to her? For the first time he behaved himself like a coward, and fled from duty and kindness. For what could he say to comfort her? And why insult her misery with vain attempts? Young Patrick had pressed shelter and rest upon her, being young and knowing no better, But the minister could not tell Walter's mother to lie down and rest, to think of her own life. What was her life to her? He passed her by with the acute and aching sympathy which bears a share of the suffering it cannot relieve. And his own suffering was sore. Oona, Oona, he cried to himself silently in his heart, as her mother had done aloud, his child, his nursling, the flower of his flock. Mysie had told him in the intervals, when her mistress was quiet, in whispers and with tears, of all that had happened lately, and of Oona's face that was like the Sabbath of the sacrament, so grave yet so smiling as she left the aisle. This went to the old minister's heart. He passed the ruin where Hamish was still plucking uselessly, half stupefied, at the stones, and Patrick, with his back against the unbroken wall, had fallen asleep in utter weariness. Mr. Cameron did not linger there, but sought a place out of sight of man, where he could weep, for he was old, and his heart was too full to do without some natural relief. He went through the ruined doorway to a place where all was still green and intact, as it had been before the explosion, the walls standing, but trees grown in the deep soil which covered the old stone floor. He leaned his white head against the roughness of the wall, and shed tears that made his old eyes heavy, and relieved his old heart with prayer. He had prayed much all the night through, but with distracted thoughts, and eyes bent upon the broken-hearted creature by whose side he watched. But now he was alone with the great and closest friend, he to whom all things can be said, and who understands all. "Give us strength to resign her to thee," he said, pressing his old cheek against the damp and cold freshness of the stones, which were wet with other dews than those of nature, with the few concentrated tears of age, that mortal dew of suffering. The prayer and the tears relieved his soul. He lifted his head from the wall, and turned to go back again, if, perhaps, now fresh from his master's presence, he might find a word to say to the other woman who all night long, like Rizpah, had sat silent and watched her son. But as he turned to go away, it seemed to the minister that he heard a faint sound. He supposed nothing but that one of the men who had been working had gone to sleep in a corner, and was waking and stirring to the daylight. He looked round, but saw no one. Perhaps, even, there came across the old man's mind some recollection of the tales of mystery connected with this house, but in the presence of death and sorrow he put these lesser wonders aside. Nevertheless, there was a sound, faint, but yet of something human. The old stone floor was deep under layers of soil, upon which every kind of herbage and even trees grew, but in the corner of the wall against which he had been leaning, the gathered soil had been hollowed away by the droppings from above, and a few inches of the original floor was exposed. The old man's heart began to beat with a bewildering possibility, but he dared not allow himself to think of it. He said to himself, but it must be a bird, a beast, something imprisoned in some crevice. He listened. God, was that a moan? He turned and rushed, with the step of a boy, to where Patrick sat dozing, and Hamish, stupefied, worked on mechanically. He clutched the one out of his sleep, the other from his trance of exhaustion. Come here, and listen. What is this? The old minister said. End of chapter 16, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 17, Part 1 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The two fugitives, holding each other's hands, had fled from the fire without a word to each other. All that needed to be spoken seemed to them both to be over. They hurried on instinctively, but without any hope, expecting every moment when destruction should overtake them. Walter was the last to give up consciousness, but the sickening sense of a great fall, the whirl and resistance of the air rushing madly against him through the void, the sensation mounting up to his brain, the last stronghold of consciousness, and thrill of feeling, as if life were to end there in a painful rush of blood, were all that were known to him. What happened really was that, holding Oona insensible in his arms, he was carried downwards with the slide and impetus of the part of the ruin on which he was standing, detached by his own weight rather than thrown violently down by the action of the explosion. The force of the fall, however, was so great, and the mass falling with them so heavy, that some of the stones, already very unsteady, of the pavement below gave way, and carried them underground to one of the subterranean cellars, half filled up with soil, which ran under the whole area of the old castle. How long they lay there, unable to move, and for some part of the time at least entirely without consciousness, Walter could never tell. When he recovered his senses, he was in absolute darkness and in considerable pain. Oona had fallen across him, and the shock had thus been broken. It was a moan from her which woke him to life again. But she made no reply to his first distracted question, and only gave evidence of life by a faint little cry from time to time, too faint to be called a cry, a breath of suffering, no more. The suffocating, terrible sensation of the darkness, a roar of something over them like thunder, the oppression of breathing, which was caused by the want of atmosphere, all combined to bewilder his faculties and take away both strength and will to do anything more than lie there quietly and gasp out the last breath. Walter was roused by feeling in Oona an unconscious struggle for breath. She raised first one hand, then another, as if to take away something which was stifling her, and he began to perceive in the vagueness of his awakening consciousness that her life depended upon his exertions. Then, his eyes becoming more accustomed to the darkness, he caught a faint ray of light, so attenuated as to be no more than a thread in the solid gloom. To drag himself towards this, and with himself the still more precious burden, thus in utter helplessness confided to him, was a more terrible work than Walter in all his life had ever attempted before. There was not room to stand upright, and his limbs were so shaken and aching that he could scarcely raise himself upon them, and one of his arms was useless, and, when he tried to raise it, gave him the most exquisite pain. It seemed hours before he could succeed in dragging her to the little opening, a mere crevice between the stones, through which the thread of light had come. When he had cleared the vegetation from it, a piercing cold breath came in and revived him. He raised Oona in his arms to the air, but the weight of her unconsciousness was terrible to him in his weakened condition, and though she began to breathe more easily, she was not sufficiently recovered to give him any help. Thus she lay, and he crouched beside her, trying to think, for he could not tell how long. He heard sounds above him indeed, but the roar of the falling stones drowned the human noises, and his brain was too much clouded to think of the search which must be going on overhead for his companion and himself. The worst of all was this dazed condition of his brain, so that it was a long time before he could put one thing to another and get any command of his thoughts. In all likelihood, consciousness did not fully return until the time when the men above in despair relinquished their work, for some feeble sense of cries and human voices penetrated the darkness, but so muffled and far off that in the dimness of his faculties he did not in any way connect them with himself, nor think of attempting any reply. Perhaps it was, though he was not aware that he heard it, the echo of his own name that finally brought him to the full possession of himself, and then all his dull faculties centered, not in the idea of any help at hand, but in that of fighting a way somehow to a possible outlet. How was he to do it? The pain of his arm was so great that at times he had nearly fainted with mere bodily suffering, and his mind fluctuated from moment to moment, or was it not rather from hour to hour, with perplexity and vain endeavor. He was conscious, however, though he had not given any meaning to the sounds he heard, of the strange silence which followed upon the stopping of the work. Something now and then like the movements of a bird. Was it Hamish working wildly above, half mad, half stupefied, unable to be still, kept a little courage in him, but the silence and darkness were terrible, binding his very soul. It was then that he had the consolation of knowing that his companion had come to herself. Suddenly a hand groping found his and caught it. It was his wounded arm, and the pain went like a knife to his heart, a pang which was terrible but sweet. "Where are we?" Oona said, trying to raise herself. Oh, anguish! By that broken arm. He could not answer her for the moment, he was so overcome by the pain, and he was holding her up with the other arm. "Do not hold my hand," he said at last. "Take hold of my coat. Thank God that you can speak." "Your arm is hurt, Walter." "Broken, I think, but never mind. That is nothing. Nothing matters so long as you have your senses. Oona, if we die together, it will be all right." "Yes," she said, raising her face in the darkness to be nearer his. He kissed her solemnly, and for the moment felt no more pain. "As well this way as another, nothing can reach us here, only silence and sleep." She began to raise herself slowly until her head struck against the low roof. She gave a faint cry, then finding herself on her knees, put her arm round him, and they leant against each other. "God is as near in the dark as in the day," she said. "Lord, deliver us! Lord, deliver us!" Then, after a pause, "What happened? You saved my life." "Is it saved?" he asked. "I don't know what has happened, except that we are together." Oona gave a sudden shudder and clung to him. "I remember now, the flames and the fire, and it was I that broke the lamp. What did it mean, the lamp? I thought it was something devilish, something to harm you." She shivered more and more, clinging to him. "Do you think it is he that has shut us up in this dungeon to die?" Walter made no reply. It was no wonder to him that she should speak wildly. He, too, was tempted to believe that accident had no part in what had befallen them, that they had now encountered the deadly vengeance of their enemy. He tried to soothe her, holding her close to his breast. "I think we are in some of the vaults below, perhaps for our salvation." As her courage failed, there was double reason that he should maintain a good heart. "There must be some outlet. Will you stay here and wait while I try if I can find a way?" "Oh, no, no," cried Oona, clinging to him. "Let us stay together. I will creep after you. I will not hinder you." She broke off with a cry, echoing, but far more keenly, the little moan that came from him unawares as he struck his arm against the wall. She felt it far more sharply than he did, and in the darkness he felt her soft hands binding round his neck, something warm and soft like their own touch, in which she had wound the wounded arm to support it. It was the long white cloud which had been about her throat, and it warmed him body and soul, but he said nothing by way of gratitude. They were beyond all expressions of feeling, partly because they had reached the limit at which reality is too overpowering for sentiment, and partly because there was no longer any separation of mine and thine between them. They were but one soul. But to tell the miseries of their search after a way of escape would demand more space than their historian can afford. They groped along the wall, thinking now that they saw a glimmer in one direction, now in another, and constantly brought up with a new shock against the opaque resistance round them, a new corner, or perhaps only that from which they started, under their feet unequal heaps of damp soil upon which they stumbled, and broken stones over which Oona, with childlike sobs, of which she was unconscious, caught her dress, falling more than once as they labored along. In this way they moved round and round their prison, a long pilgrimage. At length, when they were almost in despair, saying nothing to each other, only keeping close that the touch of each to each might be a moral support, they found themselves in what seemed a narrow passage, walls on each side, and something like an arrow slit over their heads, the light from which showed them where they were, and was as an angel of consolation to the two wounded and suffering creatures stumbling along with new hope. But when they had reached the end of this narrow passage, Walter, going first, fell for a distance of 2 or 3 feet into the lower level of another underground chamber like that which he had left, jarring his already strained and racked frame, and only by immense effort hindered Oona from falling after him. The force of the shock and instant recovery by which he kept her back and helped her to descend with precaution brought heavy drops of exhaustion and pain to his forehead. And when they discovered that they were nothing the better for their struggles, and that the place which they had reached at such a cost, though lighter, was without any outlet whatever except that by which they had come, their discouragement was so great that Walter had hard ado not to join in the tears which Oona, altogether prostrated by the disappointment, shed on his shoulder. "We must not give in," he tried to say. "Here there is a little light at least. Oona, my darling, do not break down, or I shall break down too." "No, no," she said submissively through her sobs, leaning all her weight upon him. He led her as well as he was able to a heap of earth in the corner, over which in the roof was a little opening to the light, barred with an iron stanchion and quite out of reach. Here he placed her tenderly, sitting down by her, glad of the rest, though it was so uninviting. The light came in pale and showed the straight enclosure of their little prison. They were neither of them able to resume their search, but sat close together, leaning against each other, throbbing with pain and sick with weariness and disappointment. It gave Walter a kind of forlorn pride in his misery to feel that while Oona had failed altogether, he was able to sustain and uphold her. They did not speak in their weakness, but after a while dozed and slept in that supreme necessity of flesh and blood which overcomes even despair, and makes no account of danger. They slept as men will sleep at death's door, in the midst of enemies, and in the depths of their suffering and misery found refreshment. But in that light sleep little moans unawares came with their breathing, for both were bruised and shaken, and Walter's broken arm was on fire with fever and pain. It was those breathings of unconscious suffering that caught the ear of the minister as he made his prayer. His step had not disturbed them, but when he came back, accompanied by the others, the light was suddenly darkened and the stillness broken by someone who flung himself upon his knees with a heavy shock of sound and a voice pealing in through the opening. "Miss Oona, if ye are there, speak, or, oh, for the love of the Almighty, whoever is there, speak and tell me where's my leddy." It was Hamish, half mad with hope and suspense and distracted affection, who thus plunged between them and the light. End of Chapter 17, Part 1, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 17, Part 2 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. They both woke with the sound, but faintly divining what it was, alarmed at first rather than comforted by the darkness into which they were plunged. There was a pause before either felt capable of reply, that additional deprivation being of more immediate terror to them than there was consolation in the half-heard voice. In this pause, Hamish, maddened by the disappointment of his hopes, scrambled to his feet, reckless and miserable, and shook his clenched fist in the face of the minister who was behind him. "How dare ye," he cried, "play upon a man that is half wild with your imaginations? There's naebody there." And with something between a growl and an oath, he flung away with a heavy step that sounded like thunder to the prisoners. But next moment the rage of poor Hamish all melted away into the exceeding and intense sweetness of that relief which is higher ecstasy than any actual enjoyment given to men, the very sweetness of heaven itself. For as he turned away, the sound of a voice, low and weak, but yet a voice, came out of the bowels of the earth, a murmur of two voices that seemed to consult with each other, and then a cry of, "Oona is safe! Oona is here! Come and help us, for the love of God!" "The Lord bless you!" cried the old minister, falling on his knees. "Oona, speak to me if you are there. Oona, speak to me. I want to hear your own voice." There was again a pause of terrible suspense. Hamish threw himself down too, behind the minister, tears running over his rough cheeks, while the young man, who was overawed by the sight, and affected too in a lesser degree, stood with his face half hidden against the wall. "I am here," Oona said feebly, "all safe, not hurt even. We are both safe, but oh, make haste, and take us out of this place." "God bless you, my bairn! God bless you, my dearest bairn!" cried Mr. Cameron. But his words were drowned in a roar of laughter and weeping from the faithful souls behind him. "Aye, that we will, Miss Oona, that we will, Miss Oona!" Hamish shouted and laughed and sobbed till the walls rang, then, clamorous with his heavy feet, rushed out of sight without another word, they knew not where. "I'll follow him," said young Patrick. "He will know some way." The minister was left alone at the opening through which hope had come. He was crying like a child, and ready to laugh too like Hamish. "My bonny dear," he said, "my bonny dear," and could not command his voice. "Mr. Cameron, my mother, she must be breaking her heart." "And mine," Walter said with a groan. He thought even then of the bitterness of her woe, and of all the miserable recollections that must have risen in her mind. Please God not to come again. "I am an old fool," said Mr. Cameron outside. "I cannot stand out against the joy, but I am going, my dear. Say again you are not hurt, Oona. Say it's you, my darling, my best bairn. and me that had not the courage to say a word to yon poor woman," he said to himself as he hurried away. The light was still gray in the skies, no sign of the sun as yet, but not only the hills distinct around, but the dark woods and the islands on the water, and even the sleeping roofs so still among their trees on the shores of the loch had come into sight. The remaining portion of the house, which had stood so many assaults, and the shapeless mass of the destroyed tower, stood up darkly against the growing light, and almost like a part of it, like a statue that had come down from its pedestal, was the figure of Mrs. Methven, which he saw standing between him and the shore, her face turned towards him. She had heard the hurrying steps and the shout of Hamish, and knew that something had happened. She had risen against her will, against the resolution she had formed, unable to control herself, and stood with one hand under her cloak, holding her heart, to repress, if possible, the terrible throbbing in it. The face she turned towards the minister overawed him in the simplicity of his joy. It was gray, like the morning, or rather ashen white, the color of death. Even now she would not, perhaps could not, ask anything, but only stood and questioned him with her eyes, grown to twice their usual size, in the great hollows which this night had opened out. The minister knew that he should speak carefully, and make easy to her the revolution from despair to joy, but he could not. They were both beyond all secondary impulses. He put the fact into the plainest words. "Thank God, your son is safe," he cried. "What did you say?" "Oh, my poor lady, God be with you. I dared not speak to you before. Your son is safe. Do you know what I mean? He is as safe as you or me." She kept looking at him, unable to take it into her mind. That is to say, her mind had flashed upon it, seized it at the first word, yet, with a dumb horror holding hope away from her, lest deeper despair might follow, would not allow her to believe. "What did you say? You are trying to make me think." And then she broke off and cried out, "Walter," as if she saw him, as a mother might cry who saw her son suddenly, unlooked for, come into the house when all believed him dead, and fell on her knees, then from that attitude sank down upon herself and dropped prostrate on the ground. Mr. Cameron was alarmed beyond measure. He knew nothing of faints, and he thought the shock had killed her. But what could he do? It was against his nature to leave a stranger helpless. He took off his coat and covered her, and then hurried to the door and called up McAllister's wife, who was dozing in a chair. "I think I have killed her," he said, "with my news." "Then ye have found him," the three old people said together, the woman clasping her hands with a wild, "Oh, Hun! Oh, Hun!" while Symington came forward, trembling, as pale as death. "I had hoped," he said, with quivering lips, like the apostles with one that was greater, that it was he that was to have delivered. Oh, but we are vain creatures, and now it's to begin again." Is that all ye think of your poor young master? He is living, and will do well. Go and take up the poor lady. She is dead, or fainted, but it is with joy." And then he went upstairs. Many an intimation of sorrow and trouble the minister had carried, but good news had not been a weight upon him hitherto. He went to the other poor mother with trouble in his heart. If the one who had been so brave was killed by it, how encounter her whose soft nature had fallen prostrate at once? He met Mysie at the door, who told him her mistress had slept, but showed signs of waking. "Oh, sir, if ye could give her something that would make her sleep again, I could find it in my heart to give her what would save my poor lady from ever waking more," cried the faithful servant. "For oh, what will she do? Oh, what will we all do without Miss Oona?" "Mysie," cried the minister, "how am I to break it to her? I have just killed the poor lady downstairs with joy, and what am I to say to your mistress? Miss Oona is safe and well. She's safe and well." "Oh, Mr. Cameron," cried Maisie with a sob, "I ken what you are meaning. She's well, the Lord bless her, because she has won to heaven." Mrs. Forrester had woke during this brief talk, and raised herself upon the sofa. She broke in upon them in a tone so like her ordinary voice, so cheerful and calm, that they both turned round upon her with a kind of consternation. "What is that you are saying? Safe and well? Oh, safe and well! Thank God for it, but I never had a moment's doubt. And where has she been all this weary night? And why did she leave me in this trouble? What are ye crying for, Mysie, like a daft woman? You may be sure my darling has been doing good, and not harm." "That is true, my dear lady, that is true, my dear friend," cried the minister. "God bless her, she has done us all good, all the days of her sweet life." "And you are crying too," said Oona's mother, almost with indignation. "What were you feared for? Do you think I could not trust God, that has always been merciful to me and mine? Or was it Oona ye could not trust?" she said with smiling scorn. "And is she coming soon? For it seems to me we have been here a weary time." "As soon as she can get out of the place where she is. The openings are blocked up by the ruin. I had no doubt," said Mrs. Forrester, "it was something of that kind." Then she rose up from the sofa, very weak and tottering, but smiling still, her pale and faded face looking 10 years older, her hair all ruffled, falling out of its usual neat arrangement. She put up her hands to her head with a little cry. "Bless me," she said, "she will think I have gone out of my senses. And you too, Mysie, to take my bonnet off and expose me with no cap. I must put all this right again before my Oona comes." Mr. Cameron left her engaged in these operations with the deepest astonishment. Was it a faith above the reach of souls less simple, or was it the easy rebound of a shallow nature? He watched her for a moment as she put up her thin braids of light hair and tied her ribbons, talking all the time of Oona. She never was a night out of her bed in all her life before, and my only fear is she may have gotten a chill, and no means here of making her comfortable. Mysie, you will go downstairs and try at least to get the kettle to boil and a cup of tea for her. Did the minister say when she would be here? No, mem, said Mysie's faltering voice, nathing but that she was safe and well, and the Lord forgive me, I thought. Never mind what you thought, said Mrs. Forrester briskly, but run downstairs and see if you can make my darling a good cup of tea. By the time she had tied her bonnet strings and made herself presentable, the full light of the morning was shining upon the roused world. The air blew chill in her face as she came down the staircase, strangely weak and tottering, which was just extraordinary, she said to herself, and emerged upon the little platform outside. Several boats already lay on the beach, and there was the sound of the voices and footsteps of men breaking the stillness. Mrs. Forrester came out with those little graces which were part of herself, giving a smile to old Symington, and nodding kindly to the young men from the yacht who were just coming ashore. "This is early hours," she said to them with her smile, and went forward to the little group before the door, surrounding Mrs. Methven, who still lay where Mr. Cameron had left her, incapable of movement. "Dear me," said Mrs. Forrester, "here have I been taking up a comfortable room, and them that have a better right left out of doors. They have given us a terrible night, my child and yours, but let us hope there has been a good reason for it, and that they will be none the worse. They are just coming, the minister tells me. If ye will take the help of my arm, we might step that way and meet them. They will be glad to see we are not just killed with anxiety, which is what my Oona will fear." End of chapter 17, part 2, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 18 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The news that Lord Erradeen, and it was supposed several others, some went so far as to say a party of visitors, others his mother, newly arrived, as all the world was aware, and to whom he was showing the old castle, with a young lady who was her companion, had perished in the fire, streamed down the loch nobody knew how, and was known and believed to the end of the country before the evening was over. It came to the party at Birkenbraes as they were sitting down to dinner, some time after everybody had come in from gazing at the extraordinary spectacle of the fire, got up, Mr. Williamson assured his guests, entirely for their amusement. The good man, however, had been much sobered out of that jocose mood by his encounter with the strange visitor whom he had first seen at Loch Houran, but had begun to draw a little advantage from that too, and was telling the lady next to him with some pride of Lord Erradeen's relation, a very distinguished person indeed. I'm thinking in the diplomatic service, or one of the high offices that keep a man abroad all his life. I would rather, for my part, live in a cottage at home But that is neither here nor there. So as he was leaving, and naturally could not trouble the family about carriages just at such a moment, I offered him the boat, and you could see them getting up steam. I find it very useful to have a steamboat always ready, just waiting at the service of my friends. The lady had replied as in duty bound, and as was expected of her, that it was a magnificent way of serving your friends, which the millionaire on his side received with a laugh and a wave of his hand, declaring that it was nothing, just nothing, a bagatelle in the way of cost, but a convenience. He would not deny it was a convenience, when that discreet butler who had ushered Lord Erradeen into Katie's private sitting-room leaned over his master's shoulder with a solemn face and a "Beg your pardon, sir. They say, sir, that Lord Erradeen has perished in the fire." "Lord bless us," said Mr. Williamson, "what is it that you say?" "It is only a rumour, sir, but I hear Loch Houran is all in a commotion, and it is believed everywhere. The young lord was seen with some ladies going there in a boat this afternoon, and they say that he has perished in the flames." Sanderson was fond of fine language, and his countenance was composed to the occasion. "Lord bless us!" cried Mr. Williamson again. "Send off a man and horse without a moment's delay to find out the truth. Quick, man, and put down the sherry. I'll help myself. Poor lad, young Erradeen. He was about this house like one of our own, and no later than yesterday. Katie, do you hear?" he cried, half rising and leaning over the forest of flowers and ferns that covered the table. "Katie, do you hear this terrible news? But it cannot be true." Katie had been told at the same moment, and the shock was so great that everything swam in her eyes as she looked up, blanched and terror-stricken, in mechanical obedience to her father's cry. "That man will have killed him," she said to herself, and then there came over her mind a horror which was flattering too, which filled her with dismay and pain, yet with a strange sensation of importance. Was it she who was to blame for this catastrophe? Was she the cause? "It seems to be certain," said someone at the table, "that Erradeen was there. He was seen on the battlements with a lady just before the explosion." "His mother," said Katie, scarcely knowing why it was that she put forth this explanation. "A young lady. There is some extraordinary story among the people that she had something to do with the fire." "That will be nonsense," said Mr. Williamson. "What would a lady have to do with the fire? Old stone walls like yon are not like rotten wood. I cannot understand for my part." "And there could be no young lady," said Katie. "Mrs. Methven was alone." "Well, well," said her father, "I am sorry for Lord Erradeen. He was just as fine a young fellow, but we will do him no good, poor lad, by letting our dinner get cold, and perhaps the man will bring us better news. There is always exaggeration in the first report. I am afraid you will find that soup not eatable, Lady Mary. Just send it away. There is some fine trout coming." He was sincerely sorry, but, after all, to lose the dinner would have spared nothing to poor young Erradeen. Katie said little during the long meal. Her end of the table, usually so gay, was dull. Now and then she would break in with a little spasmodic incitement, and set her companions talking, then relapse with a strange mingling of grief and horror, and that melancholy elation which fills the brain of one who suddenly feels himself involved in great affairs and lifted to heroic heights. If it was for her, if it was she who was the cause of this calamity, she had dreamed often of finding herself with a high heroic part to fulfill in the world, though it seemed little likely that she would ever realize her dream. But now, Katy said to herself, if this was so, never more should another take the place which she had refused to him. If he had died for her, she would live for him. She would find out every plan he had ever formed for good and fulfill it. She would be the providence of the poor tenants whom he had meant to befriend. She imagined herself in this poetical position, always under a veil of sadness, yet not enough to make her unhappy, known in the country as the benefactor of everybody, described with whispers aside as the lady that was to have married poor young Lord Erradeen. Katy was profoundly sorry for poor Walter. For the first few minutes her grief was keen, but very soon this crowd of imaginations rushed in, transporting her into a new world. If this were so, already everybody at table had begun to remark her changed looks, and to whisper that they had been sure there was something between Katy and the poor young lord. When the ladies went to the drawing-room, they surrounded her with tender cares. "If you would like to go to your room, my dear, never mind us." "Oh, never mind us," cried the gentle guests. "We can all understand." But Katy was prudent even at this crisis of fate. She reflected that the report might not be true, and that it was premature at least to accept the position. She smiled upon the ladies who surrounded her, and put her handkerchief to her eyes. "Of course," she said, "I can't help feeling it. Every one will feel it on the loch, and we had seen so much of him. But perhaps, as Papa says, when the messenger comes back, we may have better news." The messenger did not come back till late, when the party were about to separate. He had found the greatest difficulty in getting information, for all that was known at Auchnasheen was that the young lord and his mother had gone in the boat from the isle with the ladies to see the old castle. With the ladies, Katy could not restrain a little cry. She knew what was coming, and he had been seen, the man went on, with Miss Oona on the walls, and that was all that was known. This stroke went to Katy's heart. "Oona," she cried, with something of sharpness and bitterness in the cry, though in the wail that rose from all around who knew the isle, this tone that broke the harmony of grief was lost. But her little fabric of imaginary heroism fell into the dust, and for the moment the shock of a genuine, if alloyed, sentiment thrown back upon herself, and the secret mortification with which she became conscious of the absurdity of her own self-complacence, kept Katy from feeling the natural pity called forth by such a catastrophe, and the deeper pang which by and by awakened her heart to the thought of Oona, no rival, but the friend of her youth, Oona, the only companion of her mother, the young and hopeful creature whom everybody loved. To think that she should have indulged a little miserable rivalry on account of a man for whom she did not care the 100th part so much as she cared for Oona, before realizing this grief and calamity. Katie's honest little soul was bowed down with shame. She, too, watched that night with many a prayer and tear, gazing from her many-windowed chamber towards the feathery crest of the isle which lay between her and Loch Houran. Oh, the desolation that would be there, and Oona gone! Oh, the blank upon the loch, and in all the meetings of the cheerful neighbours! Another man on horseback was sent off by break of day for news, and not only from Birkenbraes, but from every house for miles round the messengers hurried. There had been no such excitement in the district for generations. The news reached the lodge, Sir Thomas Herbert's shooting box, early in the morning when the family met at breakfast. The previous night had been occupied with an excitement of their own. Major Antrobus, Sir Thomas's friend, brother in sport and arms, had been from the moment of his arrival a disappointment to Sir Thomas. The first evening Julia had caught him in her toils. She had sung and laughed and talked his heart, so much as remained to him anyway. He was the man of all others who, his friends were convinced, was not a marrying man. He had a good estate, a house full of every bachelor comfort, and was useful to those in whom he was interested as only a bachelor can be. Nor was it only to men that he was invaluable as a friend. He had a box at Ascot. He had ways of making the Derby delightful to a party of ladies. He was of infinite use at Goodwood. He knew everybody whom it was well to know. Lady Herbert was almost as inconsolable as her husband at the idea of losing him, and that such a man should be brought by Sir Thomas himself into harm's way, and delivered over to the enemy by the very hands of his friends, was more than flesh and blood could bear. The Herberts saw their mistake before he had been at the lodge 2 days. But what could they do? They could not send him away, nor could they send Julia away. Had they done so, that young lady had already made herself friends enough to have secured 2 or 3 invitations in a foolishly hospitable country, where everybody's first idea was to ask you to stay with them. Sir Thomas acted with the noble generosity characteristic of middle-aged men of the world in such circumstances. He told his friend, as they smoked their cigars in the evening, a great many stories about Julia, and all she had been up to in her checkered career. He described how Lady Herbert had brought her down here because of some supposed possibility about Lord Erradeen. But young fellows like that are not to be so easily taken in, Sir Thomas said, and vaunted his own insight in perceiving from the first that there was nothing in it. The Major listened, and sucked his cigar, and said nothing, but next day on the way home, when the fire at Loch Houran was reddening the skies, he took his host aside and said, "I say, all that may be true, you know. I don't know anything about that. Girls, you know, poor things, they've devilish hard lines when they've got no tin. If she's tried it on, you know, once or twice before, That's nothing to me. That's all their mother's fault, don't you know? She's the jolliest girl I ever met, and no end of fun. With her in the house, you know, a fellow would never be dull, and I can tell you it's precious dull at Antrobus on off days, when all you fellows are away. I say, I've asked her to be mine, you know, and all that, and she's going to have me, Tom. Going to have you? Oh, I'll be bound she is, and everything you've got belonging to you. In the keenness of his annoyance, cried Sir Thomas. The Major, who was somewhat red in the face, and whose figure was not elegant, but what trifles were these, Julia truly said, in comparison with a true heart, hemmed a little, and coughed, and set his chin into his shirt-collar. He stood like a man to his choice, and would have no more said. Of course she is, if she's going to have me, you know. Fixtures go with the property, said Major Antrobus, with a hasty laugh. And, I say, bygones are bygones, you know, but no more of them in the future, if we're going to be friends. The men had a quarrel, however, before Sir Thomas gave in, which was stopped fortunately before it went too far by his wife, who met them all smiles with both hands extended. "What are you talking loud about, you two?" she said. "Major, I'm delighted. Of course I've seen it all along. She'll make you an excellent wife, and I wish you all the happiness in the world." "Thank you. He don't think so," the Major said with a growl. But after this, Sir Thomas perceived that to quarrel with a man for marrying your cousin, whom he has met in your house, is one of the foolishest of proceedings. He relieved his feelings afterwards by falling upon the partner of his life. "What humbugs you women are! What lies you tell! You said she would make him an excellent wife." "And so she will," said Lady Herbert, "a capital wife. He will be twice as happy, but alas, no good at all henceforward," she ended with a sigh. The excitement of this incident was not over when to the breakfast table next morning, where Julia appeared triumphant, having overcome all opposition, the news arrived, not softened by any doubt as if the result was still uncertain, but with that pleasure in enhancing the importance of dolorous intelligence which is common to all who have the first telling of a catastrophe. There was a momentary hush of horror when the tale was told, and then Julia, her expression changed in a moment, her eyes swimming in tears, rose up in great excitement from her lover's side. "Oh, Walter," she cried, greatly moved, "oh, that I should be so happy, and he—" And then she paused, and her tears burst forth. "And his mother, his mother!" She sat down again and wept, while the rest of the party looked on, her Major somewhat gloomy, her cousin, after a momentary tribute of silence to death, with a dawning of triumph in his eye. "You always thought a great deal of young Erradeen, Jew, at least since he has been Lord Erradeen." "I was always fond of him," she cried. "Poor Walter! Poor Walter! Oh, you can weigh my words if you like at such a time, but I won't weigh them. If Henry likes to be offended, I can't help it. He has no reason. Oh, Walter, Walter! I was always fond of him. I have known him since I was that high, and his mother, I have always hated her. I have known her since I was that high. If you think such things go for nothing, it is because you have no hearts. Harry, if you love me, as you say, get your dog-cart ready this moment, and take me to that poor woman, that poor, poor woman, his mother, and she has only him in all the world. Harry, take me or not, but I will go. You said you hated her, Julia, cried Lady Herbert. And so I did, and what does that matter? Shall I keep away from her for that, when I am the only one that has known him all his life, that knew him from a child? Harry, I have ordered the dog-cart, my dear, and you are a good woman, Julia. I thought so, but with all your dear friends and people, hang me if I knew. Julia gave him her hand. She was crying without any disguise. Perhaps I haven't been very good, she said, but I never was hard-hearted, and when I think upon that poor woman among strangers— By Jove, but this is something new, cried Sir Thomas. The girl that liked young men best without their mothers, Antrobus, hey? Oh, hush, Tom, cried his wife, and dear Julia, be consistent a little, that you're sorry for your old friend. Don't laugh, Tom. Say her old flame if you like, but remember that he's dead, poor fellow. That we can understand. Major Antrobus knows all that story, but this fuss about the mother whom you never could bear, oh, that is a little too much. You can't expect us to take in that. Julia turned upon her relations with what at bottom was a generous indignation. If you don't know, she said, how it feels to hear of another person's misfortune when you yourself are happier than you deserve, and if you don't understand that I would go on my knees to poor Mrs. Methven to take one scrap of her burden off her, oh, all the more because I never liked her. But what is the use of talking? For if you don't understand, nothing I could say would make you understand. And it does not matter to me now, cried Julia, less noble feelings breaking in. Now I have got one who is going to stand by me, who knows what I mean, and will put no bad motive. The real agitation and regret in her face gave force to the triumph with which she turned to her major, and taking his arm, swept out of the room. He, too, had all the sense of dignity which comes from fine feeling misunderstood, and felt himself elevated in the scale of humanity by his superior powers of understanding. Lady Herbert, who remained behind, was saved by the humor of the situation from exploding as Sir Thomas did. To think that the delicacy of the Major's perceptions should be the special foundation of his bride's satisfaction was, as she declared with tears of angry laughter, too good. But the second and better news arrived before Julia could set out on her charitable mission. Perhaps it was better that it should end so, for though the fine outburst of feeling had been perfectly genuine and sincere, the impulse might have been alloyed by less perfect wishes before she had reached Loch Houran, and it is doubtful in any case whether her ministrations, however kind, would have been acceptable to Walter's mother. As it was, When she led her major back, Julia was too clever not to find a medium of reconciliation with her cousins, who by that time had come to perceive how ludicrous any quarrel open to the world would be. And so peace was established, and Julia Herbert's difficulties came in the happiest way to an end. End of Chapter 18, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. Chapter 19 of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The miseries of the night's imprisonment were soon forgotten. Oona, elastic in youthful health, recovered in a few days, she said in a few hours, from its effects, and the keen reality of the after-events dimmed in her mind the mystery of that extraordinary moment which appeared now like a dream, too wonderful to be true, too inexplicable and beyond experience to come into natural life at all. They spoke of it to each other with bated breath, but not till some time after their rescue, when the still higher excitement of their near approach to death, a thing which reveals the value and charm of life as nothing else does, had somewhat subsided in their minds. But their recollections were confused, they could not tell how, and as Walter had never been sure after they were over whether the terrible conflicts which he had gone through were not conflicts between the better and worst parts of his own nature, without any external influence, so they asked each other now whether the mysterious chamber, the burning lamp, the strange accessories of a concealed and mysterious life, were dreams of disordered fancy, or something real and actual. They could not explain these things to each other, neither could they understand what it was that made the throwing down of the light of such vital importance. Was it common fire, acting after the ordinary laws of nature, and finding ready fuel and the dry wood and antique furniture, or was it something more mystic, more momentous? They gave little explanation to questioners, not so much because they were unwilling as because they were unable, and when they discussed it between themselves, became more and more confused as the days went on. It became like a phantasmagoria, sometimes suddenly appearing in all the vivid lines of reality, sometimes fading into a pale apparition which memory could scarcely retain. To the world in general, the fact of a great fire, a thing unfortunately not very rare in the records of ancient houses, became after a while a very simple piece of history, and the wonderful escape of Lord Erradeen and Miss Forrester, and their subsequent betrothal and marriage, a pretty piece of natural romance. The tower, now preserving nothing more than a certain squareness in its mass of ruins, showed traces of 2 rooms that might have been, but everything was destroyed except the stones, and any remains that might have withstood the action of the fire were buried deep under the fallen walls, nor could any trace be found of concealed passages or any way of descent into the house from that unsuspected hiding-place. One thing was certain, however, that the being who had exercised so strange an influence on a year of his life never appeared to Walter more. There were moments in which he felt, with a pang of alarm, that concentration of his thoughts upon himself, that subtle direction and intensification of his mind, as if it had suddenly been driven into a dialogue with someone invisible, which had been the worst of all the sufferings he had to bear. But these, after the first terror, proved to be within the power of his own efforts to resist and shake off, and never came to any agonizing crisis like that which he had formerly passed through. His marriage, which took place as soon as circumstances would permit, ended even these last contentions of the spirit. And if in the midst of his happiness he was sometimes tortured by the thought that the change of his life from the evil way to the good one had all the results of the most refined selfishness, as his adversary had suggested, and that he was amply proving the ways of righteousness to be those of pleasantness, and godliness to be great gain, that thought was too ethereal for common use, and did not stand the contact of reality. Mr. Cameron, to whom he submitted it in some moment of confidence, smiled with the patience of old age upon this overstrained self-torment. "It is true enough," the minister said, "that the right way is a way of pleasantness, and that all the paths of wisdom are peace. But life has not said out its last word, and you will have to tread them one time or other with bleeding feet, or all is done. If the Lord has not given you a lot apart from that of other men, and human nature," the old man said, not without a little recollection of some sermon at which he smiled as he spoke, "is so perverse that when trouble comes, you that are afraid of your happiness will be the first to cry out and upbraid the good Lord that does not make it everlasting. Wait, my young man, wait, till perhaps you have a boy at your side that will vex your heart as children only can vex those that love them. Wait till death steps into your house, as step he must." "Stop!" cried Walter, with a wild sudden pang of that terror of which the Italian poet speaks, which makes all the earth a desert. "Senza quella nova sola infinita felicita che il suo pensier figura." He never complained again of being too happy, or forgot that one time or other the path of life must be trod with bleeding feet. "But I'll not deny," said the minister, "that to the like of you, my young lord, with so much in your power, there is no happier way of amusing yourself than just in being of use and service to your poor fellow creatures that want so much and have so little. Man," cried Mr. Cameron, "I would have given my head to be able to do at your age the half or quarter of what you can do with a scratch of your pen. And you must mind that you are bound to do it," he added with a smile. But before this serene course of life began, which Walter found too happy, there was an interval of anxiety and pain. Mrs. Methven did not escape, like the rest, from the consequences of the night's vigil. She got up indeed from her faint, and received with speechless thanksgiving her son back from the dead, as she thought, but had herself to be carried to his room in the old castle, and there struggled for weeks in the grips of fever, brought on, it was said, by the night's exposure. But this she would not herself allow. She had felt it, she said, before she left her home, but concealed it, not to be hindered from obeying her son's summons. If this was true, or invented upon the spur of the moment, to prove that in no possible way was Walter to blame, it is impossible to say. But the fever ran very high, and so affected her heart, worn and tired by many assaults, that there was a time when everything was hushed and silenced in the old castle in expectation of death. By and by, however, that terror gave place to all the innocent joys of convalescence, soft flitting of women up and down, presents of precious flowers and fruits lighting up the gloom, afternoon meetings when everything that could please her was brought to the recovering mother, and all the loch came with inquiries, with good wishes and kind offerings. Mrs. Forrester, who was an excellent nurse, and never lost heart, but smiled, and was sure, in the deepest depth, that all would come right, as she said, took the control of the sick-room, and recovered there the bloom which she had partially lost when Oona was in danger. And Oona stole into the heart of Walter's mother, who had not for long years possessed him sufficiently to make it bitter to her that he should now put a wife before her. Some women never learn this philosophy, and perhaps Mrs. Methven might have resisted it, had not Oona, her first acquaintance on the loch, her tenderest nurse, won her heart. To have the grim old house in which the secret of the Methven's fate had been laid up, and in which, even to indifferent lookers-on, there had always been an atmosphere of mystery and terror, thus occupied with the most innocent and cheerful commonplaces, the little cares and simple pleasures of a long but hopeful recovery, was confusing and soothing beyond measure to all around. The old servants, who had borne for many years the presence of a secret which was not theirs, felt in this general commotion a relief which words could not express. "No," old Symington said, "it's not ghosts nor any such rubbish. I never, for my part, here or elsewhere, saw anything worse than myself, but Miss Oona, whatever it was that you did on the top of that tower, and how you got there, the Lord above knows, for there never was footing for a bird that ever I saw. It has just been blessed. Ding down the nests, and the craws will flee away. What am I meaning? Well, that is just what I cannot tell. It's a confusion. I know nothing. Many a fright and many an anxious hour have I had here, but I am bound to say I never saw anything worse than myself." "All yon is just clavers," said old McAllister, waving his hand. "If ye come to that, there is naething in this life that will bide explaining. But I will not deny that there is a kind of different feel in the air, which is maybe owing to this fine weather, just wonderful for the season, or maybe to the fact of so many leddies about, which is a new thing here. Know that I hold so much with women," he added, lest Oona should be proud. "They are a great fyke and trouble, and will meddle with everything, but they're fine for a change and a kind of soothing for a little whiley at a time, after all we've gone through." Before the gentle regime of the sick-room was quite over, an unusual and unexpected visitor arrived one morning at Loch Houran. It was the day after that on which Mrs. Methven had been transferred to Auchnasheen, and a great festival among her attendants. She had been brought down to the drawing-room, very pale and shadowy, but with a relaxation of all the sterner lines which had once been in her face, in an invalid dress arranged after Mrs. Forrester's taste rather than her own, and lending a still further softness to her appearance, not to be associated with her usual rigid garb of black and white. And her looks and tones were the most soft of all, as, the center of everybody's thoughts, she was led to the sofa near the fire, and surrounded by that half-worship which is the right of a convalescent where love is. To this pleasant home scene there entered suddenly, ushered in with great solemnity by Symington, the serious and somewhat stern man of business who had come to Slowbury not much more than a year before with the news of that wonderful inheritance, so unexpected and unthought of, which had seemed to Mrs. Methven, as well as to her son, the beginning of a new life. Mr. Milnathort made kind but formal inquiries after Mrs. Methven's health, and offered his congratulations no less formally upon her recovery. I need not say to you that all that has happened has been an interest to us that are connected with the family beyond anything that I can express. I have taken the liberty," he added, turning to Walter, "to bring one to see you, Lord Erradeen, who has perhaps the best right of any one living to give ye joy. I told her that you would no doubt come to her, for she has not left her chamber, as you know, for many a year, but nothing would serve her but to come herself, frail as she is." "Your sister!" Walter cried. "Just my sister. I have taken the liberty," Mr. Milnathort repeated, "to have her carried into the library, where you will find her. She has borne the journey better than I could have hoped, but it is an experiment that makes me very anxious. You will spare her any emotion, any shock that you can help." The serious face of the lawyer was more serious than ever. His long upper lip trembled a little. He turned round to the others with anxious self-restraint. "She is very frail," he said, "a delicate bit creature all her life, and since her accident—" He spoke of this, as his manner was, as if it had happened a week ago. Walter hurried away to the library, in which he found Miss Milnathort carefully arranged upon a sofa, wrapped up in white furs instead of her usual garments, a close white hood surrounding the delicate brightness of her face. She held out her hands to him at first without a word, and when she could speak, said, with a tremble in her voice, "I have come to see the end of it. I have come to see her and you." "I should have come to you," cried Walter. "I did not forget, but for my mother's illness—" "Yes," she said with a grateful look, "you thought upon me. Oh, but my heart has been with you and her. Oh, the terrible time it was! the first news in the papers, the fear that you were buried there under the ruins, you and she, and then to wait a night and a day. I should have sent you word at once. I might have known, but I did not think of the papers. No, how should you? You were too busy with your own life. Oh, the thoughts of that night! I just lay and watched for you from the darkening to the dawning. No, scarcely what you could call praying, just waiting upon the Lord. I bade him mind upon Walter and me that had lost the battle, and I thought I saw you and your Oona. Was not I wise when I said it was a well-omened name? She paused a little, weeping and smiling. I could not tell you all the thoughts that went through my mind. I thought if it was even so, there might have been a worse fate. To break the spell and defeat the enemy, even at the cost of your 2 bonny lives, I thought it would not be an ill fate, the 2 of you together. Did I not say it? 2 that made up 1, the perfect man. That is God's ordinance, my dear. That is his ordinance. 2, not just for pleasure, or for each other, but for him and everything that is good. You believed me when I said that. Oh, you believed me, and so it was not in vain that I was killed yon time long ago. Her voice was broken with sobs. She leant upon Walter's shoulder, who had knelt down beside her, and wept there like a child, taking comfort like a child. Generally, she began after a moment, there is little account made, little account, of them that have gone before, that have been beaten, Walter. I can call you nothing but Walter today, and Oona, though she has won the battle, she is just me, but better. We lost. We had the same heart, but the time had not come for the victory. And now you, my young lord, you, young Erradeen, like him, you have won, Oona and you. We were beaten, but yet I have a share in it. How can you tell, a young man like you, how those that have been defeated lift their hearts and give God thanks? She made a pause and said, after a moment, I must see Oona too. I must see Oona too. But when he was about to rise and leave her in order to bring Oona, she stopped him once more. You must tell me first, she said, speaking very low, what is become of him? Did he let himself be borne away to the clouds and yon flames? I know it's all done, but did you see him? Did he speak a word at the end? Miss Milnathort, said Walter, holding her hands, there is nothing but confusion in my mind. Was it all a dream and a delusion from beginning to end? She laughed a strange little laugh of emotion. Look at me, then, she said, for what have I suffered these 30 years? And you, was it all for nothing that you were so soon beaten and ready to fall? Have you not seen him? Did he go without a word? Walter looked back upon all the anguish through which he had passed, and it seemed to him but a dream. One great event, and then weeks of calm had intervened since the day when, driven to the side of the loch in madness and misery, he had found Oona and taken refuge in her boat, and thrown himself on her mercy, and since the night when once more, driven distracted by diabolical suggestions, he had stepped out into the darkness, meaning to lose himself somehow in the gloom and be no more heard of, yet was saved again by the little light in her window, the watch-light that love kept burning. These recollections and many more swept through his mind, and the pain and misery more remote upon which this old woman's childlike countenance had shone. He could not take hold of them as they rose before him in the darkness, cast far away into a shadowy background by the brightness and reality of the present. A strange giddiness came over his brain. He could not tell which was real, the anguish that was over, or the peace that had come, or whether life itself, flying in clouds behind him, before him, hid under the wide-spreading sunshine, was anything but a dream. He recovered himself with an effort, grasping hold of the latest recollection to satisfy his questioner. "This I know," he cried, "that when we were flying from the tower, with flames and destruction behind us, the only words I heard from her were a prayer for pardon. Forgive him. That was all I heard. And then the rush of the air in our faces, and the roar that was like the end of all things. We neither heard nor saw more." "Pardon," said Miss Milnathort, drying her eyes with a trembling hand. "That is what I have said, too, many a weary hour in the watches of the night. What pleasure can a spirit like yon find in the torture of his own flesh and blood? The Lord forgive him if there is yet a place of repentance. But well I know what you mean, that it is just like a vision when one awaketh. That is what all our troubles will be when the end comes, just a dream, and good brought out of evil and pardon given to many, many a one that men are just willing to give over and curse instead of blessing. Now go and bring your Oona, my bonny lad. I am thinking she is just me, and you are Walter, and we have all won the day together," said the invalid, clasping her thin hands, and with eyes that shone through their tears. "All won together, though we were beaten 20 years ago. The end." End of chapter 19, read by Gerald Moe, Tucker, Georgia. End of The Wizard's Son, Volume 3, by Margaret Oliphant.